pleasure to welcome you tonight to the Hooting lecture. My name is Joseph Faulkner, and I am the interim site manager for the field station here. And if any of you know what that means, please let me know. My title's already changed once in 3 weeks, but it is my pleasure to be here. A couple of just quick business things. We do have comment sheets that we pass out on the chairs. Please do fill those out. I've been told, and I fully believe that those are taken to heart. The community input is fantastic here. It's one of the pleasures of this job so far. So please do fill those out. We also have a sign-in sheet, which I'll start circulating here. So please sign in and get on the email list. I want to recognize in the back of the room, Ranger James. James was instrumental in starting this program along with Julia. Where is she? Way in the back. Hi, Julia. Thank you so much, both of you, and everyone else involved. I don't know all of you yet, but thank you. This is a beautiful program. Great to be a small part of it. There's also an opportunity to make donations. There's going to be a little tin in the back, but if it's overflowing, just throw your money on the table. We appreciate it. It's my next very happy task to introduce to you Kathleen Hull. Kathleen, like me, is a graduate of UC Berkeley, undergrad. On three, go Bears. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Go Bears! That was so bad. Let's do it again. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Go Bears! That was better. Okay. My girlfriend back there, Jenny, is from Stanford, so. She got her master's at the University of Calgary, and again a PhD from Cal in 2002. She's an expert in the field of archaeology, and specifically here about the history of Wawona. So she's going to take us on what I think will be a really, really close to home and fascinating history spanning a couple of millennia here at Wawona. So it's my great pleasure. Please give a big hand to Kathleen. Dr. Kathleen Hull.
If I'm not loud enough in the back or even in the front, do this or do this, so I know that I have to speak louder so that all of you can hear me. Thank you for the invitation. Wawona is special to me in many ways. I started my archaeological work in Yosemite in Wawona in 1984 when I was 24 years old. So my first project was here in Wawona, co-directing a project, and I came back in subsequent years, at least 1 year after that, and directed a project, my first solo project directing here in Yosemite. So I was an archaeologist here for the Park Service from 1984 to 1990. I moved on, but I've continued to do work here in Yosemite, contract work, other work in Yosemite since then. And some of my most recent work, not my most recent, but recent work, was back in Wawona again, working with some archaeological collections that were collected in the 1980s as well. And I'll be talking about some of that work tonight. So what I'm going to start out is just placing Wawona in a larger context of the archaeology of Yosemite in general, and also the central and southern Sierra Nevada. There's similarities that we can talk about, so I'll start out by doing that. As I'm talking, I'll talk a little bit about the techniques that we use to learn what I'm talking about. So give you a little bit of background about archaeological techniques, lab techniques especially, that we use to try and answer some questions about how people lived in the past here and elsewhere. And at any time during the talk, please feel free to raise your hand or ask a question or stop me or whatever if you have a question about what I'm talking about. And then we'll move to Wawona specifically and talk a little bit about how Wawona is a little different or potentially different than what we see elsewhere, certainly in Yosemite National Park, and maybe elsewhere in the central and southern Sierra as well. So I have Joseph is my trusty steed here to help me out, so let's, and hopefully these slides will be clear enough, so it's a little grainy, but So here we are, those of you, hopefully you know where Wawona is, right? We're way down here at the southern end of the park. And archaeological work in Yosemite really started in earnest in the 1950s. So the University of California, Berkeley did some of the earliest archaeological work. And one of the first archaeological sites that was excavated in Yosemite was relatively close by here. Not in Wawona proper, but pretty close to Wawona, and that was excavated in 1956.
I have a question.
Yes?
How did they find it?
How'd they find the
How
site?
did they find the site?
So, you can usually see archaeological sites on the surface. There's evidence that's left on the surface. And so archaeologists conduct what's known as archaeological survey, where we literally walk around and stare at the ground to find archaeological sites. And there are some distinctive features, some of which I'll talk about, that make it relatively easy to identify archaeological sites if you know what you're looking for in Yosemite. So and some archaeological sites, especially these early ones that were first studied in the 1950s, park rangers identified them, or other people identified them and told these academics about these archaeological sites. But then archaeological survey was conducted in many areas of the park to actually find more sites and fill out the archaeological record for Yosemite National Park. But yeah, stuff's on the surface, pretty much on the surface for the most part. So Wawona has had a lot of archaeological work done. Other areas that have had a lot of archaeological work, Yosemite Valley, a lot of archaeological work done in Yosemite Valley. A lot of work done in El Portal, the administrative site just outside, but still Park Service land. So you'll see, when you just look at this map, right, most of the archaeological work, where a lot of the archaeological work has been done in Yosemite, is on the western side of the park and at Yosemite standards, relatively low elevation, right? Yosemite Valley's 4,000 feet, Wawona's 4,000 feet, El Portal's about 1,500 feet in elevation. So mostly west side, mostly low elevation. There's been a little bit more archaeological work, or less archaeological work, but other archaeological work done in Tuolumne Meadows, at Crane Flat, and along Glacier Point Road. But you'll see that if you look at this map, right, very little archaeological work done in the backcountry of Yosemite. Some sites, including some sites that I worked with the Park Service on in far northern Yosemite a couple years ago, but relatively little archaeological work in the high country, and especially in the backcountry away from roads. And so, why? Why does this map look like this? Most archaeological work that's done in the park and everywhere else these days is done to comply with federal law. So the National Historic Preservation Act says that if there's federal land, federal money, or federal permits that are involved in any project that's proposed, then archaeological resources have to be considered as part of that planning process. And so we're on federal land here. Also federal money is involved as well for most of the projects that we're talking about. So any project, what's called an undertaking under the law, that could potentially impact significant archaeological sites, disturb significant archaeological sites, some archaeological work has to be done. Minimally archaeological surveys, see what's there, and then if something is found, then additional excavation and so forth. So that's why this map looks like this. The archaeology's been done in areas that are developed in the park, where there's a lot of development and where the park is continuing to put in water lines, sewer lines, electric lines, improve the roads, all of that kind of stuff. And so that's where the archaeological work has been done. And a lot of the work here in Wawona was done back in the 1980s, the work that I was involved in, because of the sewage treatment, the wastewater treatment plant that was put in, right? All of Wawona had sewer lines put in at that point, and a lot of archaeology in the 1980s was involved in the project to put in all of the lines and the wastewater treatment plant and so forth that's here today. So this is some of these are just report covers from the archaeological work. The earliest work, sort of systematic work here, was 1980. by John Whitaker, 1984, Rick Urban, this is me, 1987, the report from work that I did. More recent work has been related to transportation, so roads mostly. All that other work was that sewer, wastewater treatment plant. The more recent work's been related mostly to roads and also to potential disturbances around Wawona Hotel, so infrastructure and so forth that have been associated with Wawona Hotel. And so that's what some of the more recent work has been done. So let's talk about what we know for Yosemite in general in terms of the archaeology. What are the similarities between Wawona and Yosemite Valley and El Portal, and also areas to the south? There's been a lot of archaeological work in relative terms at Crane Valley, so Bass Lake is Crane Valley. A lot of archaeological work done there, again in the 1980s, for PG&E, because they were getting relicensed, right? A hydroelectric project is being relicensed, that's a federal permit, so archaeological work was done for that. So let's talk about what generally the archaeology of the Sierra Nevada, Central Sierra Nevada is like. So the first thing you need to know is that most flake stone tools in Yosemite were made of obsidian. So obsidian is a volcanic glass, and this is why, to come back to your question about how do we identify archaeological sites, this material does not occur naturally in the Yosemite area. In fact, it does not occur naturally on the western slope of the Sierra Nevada. So if you see, don't pick it up, it's illegal to pick it up, but if you see obsidian, it's cultural. If you see obsidian on this side of the Sierra, it's cultural, it's archaeological. And so it stands out, it's easy to spot in that sense. So obsidian, most of the tools that were made and used by people of the central and southern Sierra Nevada was obsidian. Again, this material, the closest sources of obsidian occur over on the eastern side of the Sierra Nevada, just to the north of Mono Lake and just to the south of Mono Lake. There's also sources further south, including where that big earthquake was recently, big obsidian source down there, but that source wasn't used by people here. Anyway, obsidian, 99.9% of all flake stone tools pretty much in the Yosemite area were made of obsidian. So that's common throughout the central and southern Sierra Nevada, and we'll come back to this later. So what kinds of tools, what kinds of flaked stone tools? So flaking is just a way to manufacture tools. What are the kinds of tools that we see? So, scraping tools, cutting tools, things that were made expedient, so things that were made on the fly, right? I need to cut this animal skin. I need to prepare these basketry materials. Those kinds of tools, you just knock a flake off, a piece of obsidian, and you can be very sharp, as my students can attest who cut themselves on obsidian. Very sharp material, and those tools can be made very easily. More formal tools, drills, and what we refer to as projectile points. So what we're just talking about, projectile, right? Something that flies through the air, and the point of a projectile. And these are the kinds of more finished and formal tools, take longer to make, and are made in advance. Right? They're not made on the fly, they're made in advance in preparation, so you have a tool ready when that deer runs by and you need to kill it, or that person runs by, you need to kill it, as the case may be. And so early in time for this, these are typical of Yosemite, early in time over there on the left are large projectile points that are corner notched, so they're notches in the corner. And they were used with the atlatl, which you see down here. So these are dart points. The point of a dart, the dart was thrown with an atlatl. And an atlatl, you can see that here, it's just sort of like a stick. And the dart is sort of hooked into the end of the stick, and the stick extends your arm. So think about, you've probably seen those things to throw balls to dogs, that have the little cup on the end. And instead of just throwing the ball yourself, right, with your hand, if you have that extension with a little thing to hold the tennis ball at the end, you can throw the ball farther, right? Well, the same thing with an atlatl. If you've got an atlatl, it extends your arm, makes your arm longer, and you can throw something farther. So that's the earlier technology, and that's what those points up there are. But there was a technological change. Here in Yosemite, here in Wawona, oopsie, back, sorry.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, and elsewhere as well, and we see, it doesn't show up so well here, projectile points get smaller. They're still corner notched, but they kind of shrink a little bit. And then the latest projectile points in time are notched on the sides, desert side notch points, and they're smaller still. And these two types of projectile points were used with a bow and arrow. So there was the atlatl stopped being used, and the bow and arrow was introduced and started to be used. So you can still kill really big stuff with these because the technology is different. So this is a technological change we see in Wawona, we see in Yosemite, we see in Central Sierra, we see throughout North America. It's a technological change we see everywhere. The timing of that technological change varies from place to place. And the technological change here from atlatl to bow and arrow occurred around 1,300 years ago or so, something like that. So typical of Wawona, typical of Yosemite. So those are flake stone tools, but there's also ground stone tools that are made and shaped by grinding. And in the Central Sierra Nevada, in Wawona, we have two main types of groundstone tools. Earlier in time, again, handstones and milling stones, you might also hear them referred to as manos and metates, so relatively flat surfaces, the vegetal material, so the plant material was placed on it, and it was ground, it was milled either in a back and forth motion or in a circular motion on that relatively flat surface. So these actual metates right here are from Wawona. They are from Wawona. I've had that picture forever. And I think folks here, some folks have probably seen these kinds of things around in your yard or in the area. If you haven't seen those, you may have seen these. And these are bedrock mortars. As technology, again, for grinding vegetal material and also grinding small animals. They were sort of the Cuisinart of prehistory. And in this case, things were ground by using an up and down motion. So not a circular, not a back and forth, but an up and down motion to pound things, and especially to pound acorn. So yes?
Where are those upper left ones now?
They are in the Yosemite Museum in El Portal. These were collected in 1980, I think, yeah. Yes, so, yes.
I heard someone suggested back when we found the metates on our property that oak trees maybe didn't exist around here at that time, and I wondered if that...
We'll talk some about that when we get there. The general belief is that manos and metates were used primarily to process like grass seeds. And that you have this shift to mortars and pestles when you have a shift to greater reliance on acorns. If you can imagine a relatively flat monometate, if you had acorns, they would be bouncing off. And you really couldn't use that technology very well to mill acorns. So there is and we'll get back to this, there is an association that maybe earlier in time with manos and metates, we're talking about greater reliance on grass seeds, and later in time when we have the shift to mortars, a greater reliance on acorns. So, yeah.
Are the pits in the bedroom naturally occurring, or did they?
And we'll get back to this as well. So some of them may have started out, you take advantage of a natural depression, but they're manufactured in some ways, and we'll talk about how ideas have changed about that over time, and how that's been really interesting for archaeologists in the area, making us rethink how these things were actually formed and what that means about the use of them. Other questions? Okay. All right. Also in Yosemite, we sometimes find beads of various kinds. The upper level there, these are stone beads, C-type, so soapstone, relatively soft stone. Sometimes shell beads, marine shell beads, so these are being imported from the coast. Sometimes bone beads, very rarely, and then later in time, once the Spanish, later the Russians come to California, you start to see glass beads in the archaeological record. There's also a little bit of rock art in Yosemite, and primarily pictographs, which is what you see here. So pictographs, contrasting with petroglyphs, pictographs are painted. So they're painted on, usually here with red paint, sometimes with a little white and black. This is fairly uncommon for Yosemite, but does occur. Petroglyphs are created by pecking the rock, and we don't have those, or if we do, they've long since deteriorated. But we do have some pictographs in Yosemite, including in Wawona. So in the 1960s, there was an avocational, I don't want to say avocational archaeologist so much, she was just sort of a tourist, kind of, but really loved Yosemite, frequently to visit Yosemite, and happened to photograph some pictographs here in Wawona, and they have long since faded. You can't see them anymore. So this picture she took in the early 1960s are our only record of the pictographs. But there are pictographs. There were pictographs.
Were they exposed? Is that?
Yeah, yes, they were exposed. It's amazing. They were just on a boulder. It's amazing they lasted as long as they did. Both of these here are not from Wawona, and both of them are in overhangs where they're protected. And that's when you tend to get rock pictographs, especially when they're protected, they'll last longer. But the ones here, the one here was not. Yeah.
Would they have used like manzanita berries to do that, or how would they use?
The red pigment is a mineral is most likely a mineral pigment. So red ochre, a mineral pigment that contains iron, will give that red color. The black is probably charcoal. The white, I'm not quite sure. And pretty rare, but red is, yeah, red ochre. Yeah.
Could you make a calculation based on the picture of when they were made and maybe what expedited their
Demise?
in a seemingly short period of time, maybe compared to how long?
No. The short answer is no, not here in the park. The rock art here is the rock art I'm familiar with, the pictographs that I'm familiar with here in the park, do not depict things that change through time. There's other places, I was talking with somebody about, you who's gone now, some of the best rock art in California, not to slam rock art in Yosemite, don't get me wrong, but some of the most spectacular rock art in California is down on China Lake Naval Weapons Center, down at Ridgecrest, where the earthquake just was. You can't go there, which is why I'm telling you. You can only go there because it's on a naval base. You can only go there with an escort. And the Matarango Museum that's in Ridgecrest does these tours there occasionally. Anyway, that's a long story. But in that rock art and in other places, in the Southwest, some places, there's depictions of things that only occur late in time. So you start to see the bow and arrow. you know that rock art's late. You see people on horses, you know that's late in time. At COSO, at Channel Lake Naval Weapons Center, there's atlatls. And so we can date some of the rock art there. That also happens to be petroglyphs rather than pictographs. And there's other experimental ways to date petroglyphs. But here in the park, we don't really know how old it is. So rare pictographs. So what don't we have in the archaeological record, or really rarely? I've already talked about some rare stuff, but also rare. We don't have organic remains. So we don't have preservation, or very good preservation, of floral material, so plant material. So evidence of what people were actually eating doesn't preserve well here. And we also don't tend to have faunal remains, so animal bones. We don't tend to have that, which also means we don't have human remains. Great, but we don't have floral and faunal, and that's because the soils in the Sierra Nevada in general tend to be acidic, acid, because of the pine trees, the conifer trees, right? If you've ever tried to grow anything a tree, unless it's an acid-loving plant, it's not going to do well. There's acids in the soil, and the soils here are also really grainy, right? The soil here is decomposed granite. It's like sand, and it just is really abrasive. And between those two things, we don't tend to get good preservation of floral and faunal. So what does that mean? We don't have direct evidence for, or rarely do we have direct evidence for what people ate, even though that's a very big part of their life. All right, let's next. So archaeological work done from the 1950s, synthesized. All this information was brought together, and two big syntheses were done of archaeological work, or archaeological data in Yosemite, one in 1999 that I co-authored, and then more recently in 2012, another synthesis trying to bring all of these data together and have a big picture story, what was going on in the Sierra Nevada. And of course, one of the things that I already talked about, some of the things that are in these reports, but one of the things that archaeologists always want to do is try and place things in time, right? We want to see how things change through time, or what trends through time. So how do we put things in time here in the park? We could use radiocarbon dating, right? Most of you have probably heard of radiocarbon dating, right? You watch National Geographic or anything, you always hear about radiocarbon dating. So basically, during the life of a plant or during the life of an animal, there's a radioactive version of carbon that's around. It's in minor amounts compared to the normal way that carbon is around. And when the critter dies, the plant dies, and the animal dies, there's not taking in that carbon anymore. And the carbon-14, the unstable radioactive form of carbon, decays. It sort of disappears. And the rate at which it disappears, we can figure out how long it's been since something died. What do you need to do this? You need something that was alive. You need plant material or animal material, and we don't have that, right? It doesn't preserve well here. And so we can do radiocarbon dating. We've got the material, but we rarely have the material to do radiocarbon dating. So how do we know how old sites actually are? We have, and I'm biased here, even better method.
Sure.
She argues, since this is my specialty. So we have what's called obsidian hydration dating here. And so obsidian, this volcanic glass, which 99.9% of the artifacts in the park are made out of, flakestone artifacts are made out of. When obsidian is freshly exposed to the air, so when it's broken to make tools, that surface, that freshly exposed surface, starts to absorb water from the surrounding environment. So from the air, from the soil, starts to absorb water, and there's a visually distinct layer. It's called the hydration layer, right? Think hydration, water. Hydration layer that builds up on the outermost portion of the artifact. It doesn't build up like an orange rind. The water is actually being absorbed into the obsidian. And it gets thicker. When the thing is exposed, the more water it absorbs, the thicker this visually distinct layer gets. So and this is the tragic part, You have to cut out a portion of the artifact, mount it on a slide, grind it down into a thin section, and be able to measure this hydration rim in microns, so it's very small, and how thick it is. And then we can convert that measurement, various ways I won't bore you with, into how many years have passed since that artifact was manufactured. So radiocarbon dating, good for organic materials, we don't have them. Obsidian hydration dating, we can date every single artifact we find, if we had money. We don't have the money, but 1 and then 2, yes.
Is there any benefit to using this method on a flake?
Yes, absolutely. And we use it a lot on flakes. So not on finished tools, just on the debris from the manufacture of stone tools. And that's not as tragic, right? Who cares about putting a cut into a flake as compared to something you could, have on museum display. But yes, we can date everything if we wanted to. Yeah.
What's the error of the dating?
Oh gosh, okay. I so thought I had you. There is error. And there's error with radiocarbon dating too, so she says. So there's limits, so the thin section is put under a microscope and you measure. There's limits to the optical sort of accuracy of the microscope, it's usually plus or minus 0.2 microns. And the rim itself actually can vary in thickness, and so we take multiple measurements and take an average of the multiple measurements. That plus or minus 0.2 microns, so hydration does not occur in a straight line. It just doesn't, build up at a constant rate. It builds up and then kind of tapers off. So 0.2 microns here at the early end, 50 years. 0.2 microns out of that end, 200 years. But if you don't have anything else to date with, 200 years when you're talking about something 5,000 years old, I can live with it. So, but yes, I'm simplifying it a lot. And there are problems with this dating method, just as there are with other dating methods. Yes?
What's the oldest thing you've dated this way? It has been dated this
In
way.
the park, maybe like 5,500 years old, maybe a little older.
Wow.
Outside the park, on a project I was working on in the Mojave Desert, about 10,000 years old. The problem with obsidian hydration is that if you get way older in time, it's like a geological process, and it stops sort of working if you get too far back in time. It also varies with temperature, so the hydration, how quickly this thing builds up will go faster if the temperature is hot, will go slower if the temperature is colder. So in Yosemite, things will hydrate faster here in Wawona than they will at Tuolumne Meadows, and we have to know those differences. There's also differences between different geological sources of obsidian, so there's a lot of complications. I'm making it a lot simpler than it really is.
Well, the China Lake is very dry, so wouldn't that affect it?
It would. It's not so much the dryness, so relative humidity does affect the rate of hydration, but relative humidity, you'd be surprised. Right below the surface, you have almost 100% relative humidity, even in the desert. It's amazing, so that doesn't play in quite as much as temperature. Anyway, we can date stuff, which is the main point. So, yes?
What is the youngest thing you've dated or would be able to date with this method?
Well, this, the microscope can't really see something less than about 0.8 microns. And so we can't really get to the younger end. And again, 0.8 microns in El Portal is going to be different than 0.8 microns in Tuolumne Meadows. So, yeah, you can't really get less than about 150 years.
It's pretty expensive.
So next, yes. So here's the chronology that's been developed for Yosemite. It's not a test. You don't have to memorize it. Just know this stuff that's in the box here is what most of the archaeological record in Yosemite is. So from about 3,500 BC, cal just means calibrated radiocarbon years. You can ignore that for purposes here. But the real meat of the archaeological record is in the late prehistoric period, 1, 2, 3. So from about 1200 BC up to European incursion into the area. That's what most of the archaeological record is here. These earlier periods of time that were proposed in these syntheses, there's evidence elsewhere in the Sierra Nevada, mostly to the north of us, Ebbets Pass, Launch Reservoir, for earlier stuff, not so much in Yosemite. It's more sort of hypothesized it would be here, but never really get down here. So just focus on that late prehistoric 1, 2, 3, right? 1 is earlier, 3 is late. You'll hear me sort of throw some of this around. So these syntheses that have been done have tended to gloss over differences between different parts of Yosemite, right? They're just like, oh, it's all Yosemite, it's all the same. A little bit of difference maybe between high and low elevation, but Yosemite Valley is the same as Wawona, right? They don't really make distinctions. But there do seem to be some things that are a little bit different about Wawona. So now we're finding the part you came for. Here, let's, next slide. So why could there be differences? Why is Wawona different than Yosemite Valley, for example? Just subtle differences, right? All that obsidian and milling equipment and all that stuff, pretty much the same, but there are subtle differences. Why? Well, one reason archaeologists often suggest that there are differences between areas is because the environment's different, right? The environment in El Portal is different than the environment in Yosemite Valley. And El Portal was used for wintertime habitation, and Yosemite Valley was more fall and summertime habitation. And there's differences because they're different foods, right? The environment's different. Well, that doesn't explain why Wawona would be different than Yosemite Valley, because they're essentially the same environment, right? You've got the meadows, you've got the mixed conifer forest. It's the same elevation, you know. So why would Wawona be different than Yosemite Valley, or at least a little bit different? Well, one reason might be culture, right? If it's not nature, it might be culture. So maybe the people here have different cultural preferences, or a different ethnic group than people living in Yosemite Valley. This is an ethno-linguistic map of California, which just means it shows language groups for native California, and the different colors are different languages. First thing, just as an aside, California was incredibly culturally diverse, way back. And you can get a sense of that here. So the red arrow points to where Wawona is. It's at this, and these are the distributions of native language groups at essentially at European contact, 1900 or so, a little bit later than European contact. But anyway, historically, these are the groups. That blue area where the arrow points, we're in southern Sierra Miwok territory. So you read a lot of stuff. Park Service talking about native people in Yosemite. They'll usually talk about southern Sierra Miwok, and that's just a language group, Miwok. That people themselves didn't call themselves that. That's what anthropologists called them. But we're in southern Sierra Miwok territory. But we're very close to Foothill Yokuts, and you folks will know this because you know Chuck Chansey Gold Casino Resort, right? They're Yokuts. So you go to Oakhurst, you're in Yokuts territory. And if you go a little bit upslope from Oakhurst, you're in Wenatchee territory, Western Mono territory, and these are folks that actually linguistic evidence suggests came over to live on the western side of the Sierra about 650 years ago. So they're new arrivals to the area, basically. So Wawona is really close to all these different, at least historically, really close to where 3 different language groups came together. And maybe that's why we're seeing some of the differences that we see in the archaeological record here than we see elsewhere. So what differences do we see? Let's go back to those handstones and milling stones and some of the questions that were coming before. So we have a really large collection of portable milling equipment from all that water and sewer line stuff from the 1980s, and from archaeological monitoring. So not necessarily from archaeological excavation, but as the construction was going on, right, as those backhoes were out there digging those trenches, an archaeologist is sitting there watching to see what comes out of the trenches and see, because it's not always on the surface, right, there can't be stuff. It's very huge collection of portable milling equipment, which is why you mentioned is so interesting. So I did an analysis of this collection a couple years ago and did a technological analysis. So most of the analyses of milling equipment that's been done in Yosemite has just focused on shape, right? Is it big? Is it little? Is it deep? Is it shallow? And hasn't really thought about how the tools were produced or how the tools were really used. And so I did a different kind of analysis, looking at a whole series of attributes. Don't worry, this isn't a test. But basically, looking at how deep the milling surface was, how big the milling surface was, how it was oriented, how much wear there was, if I could tell what kind, whether it was hard material or soft material that had been milled on the milling surface and so forth. A whole bunch of stuff you don't care about, but a really detailed analysis basically was done, especially trying to get at how intensively were these tools used. Were they used, once or twice and thrown away? Were they used a lot? Were they sort of reworked so they could still be used after they started to wear out, and so forth. And this was the first time this kind of really detailed analysis had been done in Yosemite. It was done, so it's the same figure again. So here we have milling stones, and you can see, right, the milling surface there, the milling surface there, and then these guys here that are used on. So what do we see? Both flat milling stones, so the milling surface is flat, and basin types, where the milling surface is more concave. So both of those kinds of milling stones, we see metates, we see in Yosemite, but the size of the things are relatively uniform, which means sort of functionally, they sort of had a size in mind, right? Not too big, not too small, right? Sort of Goldilocks sort of approach to. And the monos, same thing, all about the same size, so functionally seem to sort of work. The size of the monos, they look huge here, they fit in one hand. So they were not milling with two hands, like you see in the Southwest. They were just using a single-handed mono or handstone to grind with here. And the milling surface sort of fits the milling surface of the metates. Yes?
Have you determined what the difference is between and what they were used for, the concave as opposed to the more flat?
We don't know.
It seems like they were used about the same time, probably.
They were.
Yeah.
Good for you. You're stealing my thunder. Yes, absolutely.
I'm saying that because the ones we found one of each in the same,
exactly.
same
Yeah.
spot.
Is it possible that the more concave ones are just ones that have been used for longer and are more worn down?
It doesn't appear to be that way. Now, it could be maybe they're starting to use acorns and they want deeper, or but you're absolutely right, aren't they? I've got it in my notes, that's what I'm saying. They occur at the same time.
Yeah.
So there's probably some functional difference there, but we don't know what it is yet. We don't really know.
Kathleen,
Yeah.
can I just speculate? I mean, it could simply be cooking style. I mean, food preparation style.
It could be. It could be. I won't go into the boring details. It's probably what they were milling, because they seem to be picking out thicker slabs when they're going to have a basin and thinner slabs when they're going to have flats. So it's like they knew where they were going with it.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just, hey, they picked out something really thick and then they just used it flat. No, they made a basin type when they picked out a big, thick rock. With the handstones, hard to know exactly the motion that they used, except it's maybe hard to see. This one down here, I hope you can see, the milling surface sort of curves up and goes down on both faces. You can't really see it here too clearly. What that means is instead of just going back and forth like this, or just around like this on flat rock, they were rotating it as they were milling. Yeah,
Keep referring to the users as they. Who are they?
probably women, but,
What tribe
I avoid ascribing an ethnic group because when we're talking about something that's 2,000 years old, do I know what ethnic group it is? I don't. So, and that's me being, you know, the cagey academic, where we don't tend to, we don't commit unless we really know. Later in time, when we get to bedrock mortars and so forth, we're probably talking about the Miwok. But given how close we are, and some other things that I'm going to talk about in a minute, we could be talking about Gilgits. We might be talking about Monachi. It's hard to say. Anyway, so you get both. There's no, you know, there's no change through time in terms of basement versus flat. There were a few pestles. Here's a pestle here. That was found, and we find pestles sometimes where we don't have mortars. I don't know. Maybe you have an idea why we would find pestles when we don't have mortars. Maybe they were starting to make some kind of technological change. Started to, you know, that doesn't quite make sense to us. Or maybe they were lugging their pestles back home. But we do find that here. And so maybe pestles came in a little bit earlier here than they did in other places. So we're not quite sure what's going on. Anyway, really intensive use of portable milling equipment. These things were used a lot. The wear, the amount of wear, especially on the metates, on the milling stones, a lot of wear. Used a lot. And also evidence that they were resharpened. So, resharpening a milling stone. If you use a milling stone enough, it gets really slick, right? And the stuff's not going to stick when you're trying to mill it. So what do? You pack it with another rock to rough it up. And we see that in Wawona. They were using the equipment so much, they would pack it and rework it so that we could keep on using it. And we don't tend to see that so much elsewhere. Next. So let's go back. The interesting thing about milling equipment here is there's been a lot of focus on milling technology in Yosemite and in Wawona in particular. This gets back to one of the questions that we had earlier about mortars. How are they formed? So up until about 1985-ish, archaeologists always thought that the depth of the mortar was based on how long it had been used, right? The longer you use it, the deeper it gets. But there was some work done by cultural anthropologists down amongst the Monachi, so just south of us here, Monachi women who still use mortars to make acorn flour, traditional in that area. And what do? They use a chisel to make the mortars, or to start the mortars, and they make mortars to different depths for different purposes. And so what this anthropologist found out is that very shallow mortars, what the women referred to as starter mortars, so about 5 centimeters, like 2.5 inches or less in depth, they did initial acorn processing on. Slightly deeper mortars up to about 5 centimeters in depth, so 6 inches-ish. Were finishing mortars, so they did the later stages of flour preparation in those deeper mortars. The deeper, like 5 to 12 centimeter, the really deep ones, seeds. They run seeds. And so we had a whole different way of looking at stationary milling equipment now. Totally blew our minds. Like, oh my God, this is function, this isn't time. So what do the data in Yosemite show us? So we looked at the depth of these things. Again, this is a lot of data to take in. Basically from the south, so Craig Valley, Bass Lake, Wawona, and then going north to Tyler Road, looking at the percentage of mortars with different depths. So starter mortars, those shallow mortars, finishing mortars, or slightly deeper mortars, the seed mortars. And then some of these milling outcrops will have milling slicks. So sort of like batates, but on bedrock. And so sometimes we have those. Well, what do you see when you look at this figure? No milling slicks in the southern part of the park. We found a few since these days, but very few. You get them farther to the north. So what do we, and what do we have? Lots of these deeper mortars, and relatively few of the deeper mortars as we go north. So it looks like there's two different ways of processing seeds. In Wawona and the southern part of the park, and the rest of the park. Again, this might be a cultural thing, right? If you've ever gone, some of the big reservoirs down the valley, like Hidden Reservoirs, really deep waters. Yokits boats, really deep water. Most of the time we don't have that kind of thing. So we may be looking at yokits or people influenced by yokits who prefer to process their seeds in deep mortars instead of on milling stones that we sell. Yeah.
How deep are the bedrock mortars just down the road here?
Oh, gosh, I don't know off the top of my head, but you can go out there and measure them. Yeah, lay a pencil or ruler across the top and just measure down and see how deep that could be a project for you. It's been done, but I don't know off the top of my head. But if you look at them, you might see some at this deep, but you don't see this kind. You don't see this kind of business. Yeah.
I suppose that a mortar could eventually become too deep to be useful.
And that's what the women, and that's what the women in Monachi women said, right? You don't go too deep, especially with acorns. Black oak acorns are the preferred acorns. It starts to sort of gum up, and you can't get it out of the mortar. Just if the mortar is too deep, and so that's they abandon it for acorn preparation, but they might use it for seed. Am I running out of time here?
No, you're
okay.
good.
All right. So I can't remember where we're going next here. So anyway, Wawona are really interesting. And it's not environment. It must be culture. Folks here had a different cultural preference. They were different, maybe they were Miwok still, but just had a slightly different preference. Or maybe we're actually looking at a different ethnic group. Next. So let's talk a little bit about obsidian. I said that there's no obsidian. It occurs in Yosemite naturally. It comes from the eastern side of the Sierra Nevada, and these are the major obsidian sources. On the eastern side of the Sierra Nevada. What you want to focus on mostly here is Casa Diablo, which are these three sources: Lookout Mountain, Sawmill Ridge, and Prospect Ridge, near Mammoth Lakes. Put yourself in. Mona Craters, which is a little bit to the north. Only the geological activity that created that was relatively late in time, so you don't see that late in time. And then Bodie Hills. That's another one to keep in mind up north. So Casa Diablo and Bodie Hills, the major obsidian sources used by people living in Yosemite. How do we know that?
Were the peoples that lived in this area, were they trading?
We will get to that. You are anticipating that, yeah. Yes, and maybe not. Okay. So how do we know? Different obsidian flows, different volcanic events, right, that create these obsidian flows. There's different geochemistry. There's different elements that are present in the obsidian in trace amounts. So barium and zirconium and strontium and all these kind of weird elements. There's different amounts of those in different obsidians. And if we go to the geologic source, we can sample that and see what the different sort of percentages are of those different trace elements. And if we find an archaeological sample, we can use X-ray fluorescence analysis, and we can see what the elements are. And we can match that archaeological specimen back to the geological source of obsidian. So that's me with my portable X4F, and it'll make a little graph like this, and it'll have peaks for these different elements, and we can match that to another source to know where the material comes from next. So this is a map that was done a few years ago, and again, Wawona is the green arrow. So what you will see is from the Merced River watershed south, it's Casa Diablo. Major source is Casa Diablo. Right here, run it over to Mono Lake or talking to people over monolith, or mammoth flakes, and getting your obsidian. As we move, and there's, I don't have a figure here, as we move north into Yosemite, so if we get north of like the Tuolumne River, into northern Yosemite, Bodie Hills. It's all Bodie Hills. So closest available source. So this is the big picture, right? Is that we should expect Wawona to be mostly Casa Diablo. So the darker the color, the higher the percentage of Casa Diablo. The farther away you get, the lighter the color, the drop off in percentage of Casa Diablo. So let's take a look at some recent work. Here, Yosemite in Wawona, mostly Casa Diablo. So the blues, so Casa Diablo, Mono Craters, Mono West Mountain, Bodie Hills, Mount Hicks, Cream and Clean. Yosemite is exactly what we would expect. It's Casa Diablo. It's the closest source, high quality source. And that's where most of the material was coming from, but not exclusively. And what's interesting, this is some work I did a couple years ago, is looking at changes through time. So let's look at changes through time. Again, this is again a lot to take in. So earlier in time, getting later in time, getting later in time, getting later in time. The colors are slightly different here, but what you need to know, Lookout Mountain, which is the primary Casa Diablo source, is blue. And then the red and these colors here are just other subsources of Casa Diablo. So what you need to sort of take in, right? Lookout Mountain just gets more and more important and focused on through time. Just really start zeroing in. And those other sources in Casa Diablo aren't that far away, right? I mean, they're, a couple tenths of a mile. They're right there. And people aren't using those other sources. They are zeroing in like laser on Lookout Mountain. And so so we see a change in time by the late prehistoric II, so when the bow and arrow comes in, when we start to maybe see some the beginnings of Bedrock work, just gets more and more and more focused on Lookout Mountain. So how do people get their obsidian? There's different ways people could do it. One is that they went over the mountains and they got it themselves, direct access, right? I'm going to walk across the mountain, I'm going to pick up the obsidian, and I'm going to bring it back. And so that's one way to do it, or trade. So were they trading, or were they picking it up themselves? What it looks like is that, and there's various models. Yeah, we'll just do what's, I'm just going to don't worry about this, not a test. Basically, there's various ways, expectations that archaeologists have for what direct access versus trade would look like. And part of this is also based on settlement strategy. So hunting gathering, so these people were hunters and gatherers, never agriculturalists. There's two ways to sort of organize yourself. One is what's called residential mobility. You move around, you move yourself to food. So when the food runs out where you are, you move to another place, and then the food runs out there, and then you move to another place. So we keep moving around. Another way is what's referred to as logistical mobility. You sit in the same place, and you go out and bring the food back to you. So you don't move to the food, you move the food to you. And with logistical mobility, it means that you're sort of living in a place for a longer period of time, right? And bringing stuff back. And so we would expect the flakes to look different, the tools to look different, the technology to look different based on whether they were doing one or the other of these things. But anyway, let's zip on back to, and there we are again. So what it looks like is that in Wawona, anyway, we haven't done this kind of really fine-grained look at change through time elsewhere in the park quite like this, is that they were getting more and more settled in here. They were going from residential mobility, where they're moving a lot, to where there's just sitting here in Wawona. And they're probably going over to get the obsidian themselves, so direct access. Or, and this is a little less likely, and this is my opinion, the people on the other side, if they were trading with people on the other side, the people on the other side are sitting there getting less and less mobile themselves. And then there are archaeologists who say that, and it's probably true, but I think what's really going on here is these people are getting more and more settled in, right? They're using bedrock mortars, they're, you've got the site furniture there, you're not moving, your furniture is there, and they just got more and more settled in, and so what are they doing? They're going to the absolute closest source, and they walk over the mountains. It's the absolute closest source, high quality source they can go to, and they're not looking at anything else. Just like zero in, laser focus. We're gonna go there, get our obsidian, and bring it back over to Wawona. Yeah.
Do you have any idea what the trails would be? Do you have any idea of the trail?
The trails. So there was some work done by a graduate student at UC Berkeley in the 1950s, 1961. Trading trails, looked at trails. And Jim Snyder, I don't know if any of you have been around long enough to know Jim Snyder, he was a historian here in the park for a long time, and he worked on trail crew before that, and he was a backcountry living anyway. And he doesn't tend to talk about trails, he sort of talks about routes, right? It's not like today, right, where there's a path that you can follow, you just sort of were in a general area. If I was going from, and I'm a backpacker, right, if I was going over from Wawona to get obsidian, I would probably go the equivalent of going down to Bass Lake, and you take the road out towards Granite Creek, and then from Granite Creek you can go around the southern side of the minarets and pop out at Devil's Post Pile. And there's a trail there today.
About 10 miles from Devil's Post.
Yeah, you're that's because you're not going to go over the minarets, and you're not going to go anywhere. You're not going to go over the Clark Range. The best thing to do is to go south and get around the southern end of the minarets. So that, again, me as a backpacker, that's how I would go over there from Wawona to get material. And you certainly don't want to you don't want to be crossing the San Joaquin River. You could stay on the north side of San Joaquin, you could skirt, and you can look at a map today. There's a trail that goes right there. So that's probably the route, the most practical route to get over there and use. Anyway, I'm going to talk, I was going to talk a little bit settlement. We won't worry about that. Next slide. Next slide. So I'll wrap it up with that. So Wawona's a little bit different in some ways from, all of the archaeology in the Central Sierra Nevada is pretty much the same in terms of milling tools and obsidian and all that kind of stuff. But Wawona has these slight differences. And the fact that you found yet more milling equipment here, it was like, I didn't want to say it when you told me, it's like, blows my mind. There's so much portable milling equipment here.
And just in one tiny
And
spot.
we do not find it elsewhere in the park like that, not at all. And it just really blows my mind. One of the things about settlement I was going to talk about, and I'll just mention it briefly. In many areas, right, a lot of the sites are right near the water sources and so forth. Whereas here, there's a whole bunch of stuff going on back in section 36, whatever, section 34, whatever it's called. Not near water sources. And they're milling the gosh back there, and they always have. And that's where the earliest use of Wawona is back on the upper terraces, not down by the river. Now, is that because the stuff by the river got wiped out, right? The river's moving around and maybe the archaeological sites are gone? Or what are people doing back there where you guys all live now? That's where people were. That's where a lot of the action was. And a lot of the action before 1,400 years ago, was going out, it's all hanging out back there. Milling, which is unfortunate.
And that just means grasses, it doesn't mean agriculture. Right?
Oh, no, doesn't mean
Just grasses.
agriculture. It doesn't mean agriculture. Probably means grasses. In California, the only agriculturalists were along the Colorado River. Everybody else was hunter-gatherers. But that is not to say they did not manage the resources. They burned, they pruned, they did those kinds of things, and so they did enhance the environment. I don't know enough, I should have looked it up. There've been some pollen cores at Wawona Meadow. I wonder if there was a bigger meadow here. I don't know the Canada environment well enough to know why the heck they were milling apparently grass seeds, yeah. Yes.
50 years ago.
Well, 50 years ago and also 650 years ago. So in Wawona, not in Wawona, in Yosemite Valley, pollen core in Yosemite Valley shows there was a major fire about 650 years ago. A bunch of charcoal that shows there was a massive fire in Yosemite Valley about 650 years ago. And the pollen changes from conifers, so from pine and cedar, oak. And then we have low levels of charcoal after that show native people were continuing to burn to keep those oaks. We don't have that same record here in Wawona. And partly pollen preserves well in pond sediments, and so it's just really dry here compared even to Yosemite Valley, so we don't have that kind of data. But yeah, interesting.
Were there any archaeological studies done of the Hetchy grows in onion?
Hetchy, no. It was inundated way too early, right? When did that go in? 1914, I think. John Muir was still alive, for God's sake. The laws were passed in the 1960s. And there was some archaeological work done before the laws were passed, especially like when reservoirs were being built, and academic archaeologists were realizing that sites were getting destroyed all over the U.S., these big reservoir projects. But until the laws were passed, it was, nobody was paying for it. To do the archaeology. So there's been archaeological survey done at Hetchy. There was a drawdown in the Hetchy in the late 1980s, early 1990s. Archaeological survey was done there, but there's a lot of sedimentation as a result of the dam. So sites are more buried. You can see the bedrock mortars and stuff, but you can't really see the rest of the archaeology quite as well. But that would be another great comparison, same elevation and so forth, yeah.
What was the population size here in Wawona?
And Wawona, boy, I can tell you that. My dissertation research was a book, not to make a plug for the book, it's not that interesting to read. But it's an academic book, so it's a real snoozer. But I looked at collier population collapse in Yosemite from the introduction of non-native diseases. There's a native Yosemite oral tradition about diseases being introduced and many people dying. So I used, I couldn't count people, but I could count garbage, and that's sort of more garbage, more people, less garbage, less people. And I estimated that the population, the peak population in Yosemite Valley was about 1,000 people, about 1,400 years ago. The interesting thing with obsidian hydration is it shows, actually you can back up one slide. Don't get right up. The population peaked here, apparently, about 800 years ago. Really different than Yosemite Valley. But I don't know what that means in terms of people.
Let's do one more question, and then will you be available afterwards?
Sure, and you can forward to the next, yeah.
So there weren't any village sites here?
Oh yeah, there were villages. We just don't know how many people
So, Chief, one more.
there. And I will
So
be
you
here.
talked about finding a lot of the tools when they put in the sewer system here. On that note, today, at what depth generally, especially with a lot of these huge trees falling over on their own, how deep can we expect to find these tools if we were?
Garth can tell you because that happened in his yard. The depth below surface that things occur is not necessarily a direct function of time. It's a function of deposition, right? So if you're on a floodplain, you can get a lot of deposition in a very short time. If you're in the desert, you get very little deposition. So there's not sort of, how many centimeters at depth. What I do know from excavating here is it's a damn rock pile at about 60 centimeters below the surface. So, Nothing is too much below that because it's a damn rock pile down there. But anyway, yeah.
Okay.
Is that
The
giant?
tree that fell on our place left a hole about 4 feet deep, and we found the metates being held in the roots.
In the root.
Yeah, so maybe around 3 feet. By the way, if anybody wants to see them, they're in the back of my truck out here. I'll let them.
And I will run out quickly to take a look at those and then come back.
And on that note, let's give
Yeah.
Professor Hall a big. I want to recognize we have a lot of young people here who traveled very far from ARC and with the summer program. Tim, help me out. Your group.
Archaeology and conservation.
Thank you for coming. It's great to have the young people here and the rest of us as well. And thank you all for coming. Please support this program. James, do you want to add something to our presentation here?
Only that next month, I think we're talking about bats.
Bats.
Like if any of the young folks in the back want to know about careers in archaeology, I've had just about everyone. I've worked for the government, I've worked for a private company, I've worked for a museum, I've worked for a university, so pretty much done it all.
And before you go, Jenny, do we get pizza? We have pizza for our young people. If you guys are hungry, you want to grab a bite? Yes? Hopefully we'll have, so if you want to come in, Dr. Hull, if you don't mind coming next door and maybe
Absolutely.
stick around, do a little
After I
social,
check out
you're all welcome to come by. Thank you all very much.